everyone, and welcome to the final part of Conan Exile's gameplay while some lunatic rambles about Barbarians of Lemuria. So, we're on to the final section of the book, which is basically the Game Master's section. It starts off with some, I would say, pretty standard GM's advice stuff, and such like that, as well as designing adventures, and specifically for Barbarians of Lemuria, since a key point is not to overdo it, and to create, and that you can create, well, I mean, yeah, or at least in Barbarians of Lemuria, since it's a very, well, not very, but it is a sort of rules-light, can be heavy on improv game. They give advice for what beginning adventures are like, as well as what the players should, well, as how you can use players' backstory for it, as well as various examples of sword and sorcery themed adventures. Now, next up they have tone and style, which is some advice for capturing the tone of sword and sorcery, which is pretty different from typical fantasy role-playing, which tends to be more high fantasy. Yeah, like, the characters aren't necessarily heroes. Like, in Sword and Sorcery, the characters are, how to put it? Heroes, okay, yeah, well, it's like I said in part 1, the characters might be heroic, but they're by and large out for themselves. They aren't like superheroes or anything, or essential, or entirely, or even necessarily most noble characters. Now they then give advice for sagas, as well as various specific bits of it.
Another new one, eh?
Lemuria,
I could smell it on you.
Adventure stuff, like, well, elements of it, like being aware of railroading, imprisonment, as well as rewards. And this is where we get to investment, to like
bracelets.
adventure points. Yeah, advancement. Basically, at the end of each adventure, you get advancement points, and you can use them to improve attributes, train combat abilities, develop careers, buy off flaws, buy a new boon, or get followers. And I went over this before at how we can make there be more room for advancement by making it so that the characters, by making it so that the characters don't have, by making it so that the characters have more room to level up by increasing the amount of dice available that you use to roll for stuff. So we covered that, and followers is perhaps the biggest difference between Barbarians of Lemuria and many other modern tabletop games. Using advancement points, you can get followers, like guys who follow your characters around, either toughs or like the weakest NPCs, which we'll get to later. That's not that much later at this point, but still. The characters can get you can get more followers, and you could potentially become a warlord just by getting enough experience points. So this is honestly a lot more like old school Dungeons and Dragons and some OSR games than many other modern tabletop games. And here we go, non-player characters. So there are 3 types of non-player characters: rabble, toughs, and villains. Rabble are the weakest enemies, and I'm not going to go into all the rules for them like usual, but I will go into some. So rabble are the weakest of all enemies. They tend to go down in 1 hit, or maybe 2 or 3 hits at the most. They might have weapons and armor, but they're so inferior in skill to the player's weapons and armor, and they're also so inferior in training, I think, would be a good way to put it, to the player's characters, that it doesn't really matter what they're equipped with. They're going to go down very quickly. Next up are toughs. Toughs are sort of middle of the road. They're designed to give the player characters a challenge, but not ultimately be better than them, or on their level, I think would be a better way to put it. So, to give an example, so like a tough might be, say, an elite guard or a bodyguard, while guard someone, while Rabble would be a more generic guard. And then finally you have the villains. These are the main antagonists, and they are made pretty much the same way heroes are. They even have villain points, which they can use to either sacrifice Rabble when an attack would hit them, have it hit the Rabble instead, or as an alternative, not an alternative, but as an additional option, they can escape down a corridor or hatchet at a moment when the players are distracted. So, yeah, and that's so I think the best way to illustrate this, Rabble's toughs and villains, is actually with the Conan the Barbarian movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, because it has some great examples of all three. So first off, let's cover the Rabble. The Rabble are the generic enemies that you see Arnold and such fight in the film. I'll probably put a clip of Valyria fighting them in the film. But you'll notice that they pretty much go down in one hit. They don't do much damage if they do hit someone. And they're overall just very weak. So those guys are essentially a perfect example of Rabble. They are just generic guys, weak, just there primarily to be cut down while forming a mostly minor obstacle to the heroes. Now, the toughs are, I think, the best example of them are Rexor and Thorgrim. Rexor and Thorgrim are named characters. They're guys who do provide a pretty big challenge at times to Conan, Valyria, and the others. But they aren't the main villain. They are close to the main villain and obey a lot of his stuff and such, but they're ultimately just more powerful minions. Now, obviously, the villain is Thulsa Doom. He is the main. Well, do you even need to say any more there? He's the main antagonist of the film. He's while not necessarily a fighter, he's more of a manipulator or a sorcerer, which is perfectly fine for villains in these situations. So, sorry, perfectly fine for a villain in sword and sorcery. And yeah, he's the one who commands everything, who does stuff, etc. So, yeah, Thulsa Doom is the main. Okay, yeah, so Thulsa Doom is the example of a villain simply because he is the main villain of the film. Also, in case you're wondering about what stats I give him, I make him mostly a mixture of sorcerer and priest, with some ranged combat skill but no melee combat skill based on, well, the movie, of course. And let me just. Okay, good. With some ranged combat skill and so with some ranged combat skill and no melee combat skill, but yeah, that's what I do with Thulsa Doom. Mostly give him that style of thing. So anyway, yeah, I think that this is the best example I could give of a build, how Barbarians of Lemuria distinguishes its NPCs. These with mooks, with the NPCs weak to strong. So, yeah, alright, now, moving on from this section, there are some examples that we give of potential toughs, mooks, potential toughs, and past the toughs, they have examples of villains and also potential player characters, or NPCs that could show up in Barbarians of Lemuria. Just because they're statted out using the villain stat line doesn't necessarily mean they have to be antagonists. Or stat out like player characters. They could potentially be allied NPCs and such. Oh yeah, and sample adventurers, of course, are there too, that potentially be playable if you want ready-made NPCs. Now next up, they talk about is a section on Sagas of Lemuria. They start off with some adventure seeds, and then they give sample adventures, so pretty classic sword and sorcery stuff, as well as general fiction of that period, like being forced to be gladiators is one, Another is being trapped on an island with cannibals. You can find a lot of this stuff in stories about explorers explorers. In reality, did this situation happen in real life? People getting trapped on islands with cannibals? Yes, it did. Not as common as it shows up in fiction, since cannibals are rare, but they do exist, and some of those cannibals did show up and attack people in real life. Guarding a caravan is another scenario, as well as having to deal with thieves. And now, after that, we have, oh yeah, another thing with a curse in the middle of a jungle. They really do have a lot of sample adventures. You could probably run a short campaign just based on those sample adventures, honestly. But now, they also give a saga generator, which I really like. I like it when Dragon Bane did it too, where you have these randomly generated adventures you can randomly generate adventures. It includes names, why they get a task, what happens to make them more complicated, and unexpected twists. They also include some tables for easy reference. And yeah, that's the book. So thank you for watching. I hope this stoked your interest in Barbarians of Lemuria, and role-playing games and sword and sorcery in general. Because I haven't been able to find a game for it. Thank you for watching, everyone, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe.